The truly based faction of the right wing probably takes more heat in American politics than any other, but the most energized critique is probably in regard to its supposed views on racial relations. The perception is, of course, that this movement is a collection of rabid, vicious freaks that hate anyone who even appears slightly ethnically tainted beside their idealized white form. The apparent vitriol is believed to only be a surface-level manifestation of a much deeper bloodlust, and the assumed truth is that they actually want all non-whites cruelly exterminated, if only society would permit it. But this assertion has to contend with the unfortunate reality that it's utterly untrue. When the issue of race is actually debated, the initial complaint fielded by shitlibs is usually a rejection of racial differences altogether. They believe that the variability between us is merely cosmetic or resulting from environmental factors. Racial distinctions are often referred to as skin deep by these people. It seems so obvious at this point with just how drastic the divergence of our behaviors are, independent of all other variables, that I'm always pretty surprised when it needs to be spelled out for anyone. But I try to have some sympathy given that this is likely the most fundamental, load-bearing myth of the liberal ideology. Regardless, if you do manage to get these dissenters to at least hypothetically agree on the premise of racial differences existing, they'll then follow up with the complaint that you actually aren't really racist enough. You took an Uber with an immigrant driver yesterday. Why didn't you beat the shit out of him? You got lunch at a Mexican taco truck. Why didn't you burn it down instead? And here lies the critical misunderstanding. A recognition of racial differences and the classification of your own race as being more compatible to your way of life than another race would be is not an incitement to any destructive action or even a directive to hate these other groups. Distinguishing the amount of love you harbor exclusively for those in your immediate family as being greater than for those outside that familial group does not automatically classify the other as an enemy. This is a very simple concept, best organized and conveyed in the Ordo Amoris, Latin for the order of love. The standard hierarchy of Ordo Amoris outlines how your devotion and affection should be allocated. Aquinas' list begins with God, moves to the self, then immediate family, close relatives and friends, countrymen, neighbors in need, enemies, and lastly, non-human creations. It very clearly defines a logic to how we should distribute our time and affection to those around us. Like anything, our attention is not an infinite resource. It's constrained by time and space just as all things are. We must prioritize those which are inherently more important to us. Otherwise, there can't be any legitimate action given the scale of society. It's not possible to equally prioritize 8 billion individuals. Disordered love leads to collapse. And what Aquinas has put forth is an obvious, instinctually ordered ladder. But to properly update the Order Amoris for relevance in today's world, a previously omitted factor must be addressed, and that is the integration of ethnic similarity and cultural cohesion as a determining factor of where people fall in our hierarchy of compassion. It was probably originally left out because, like many things, nobody back then even considered that a multicultural society could or would exist at all. I don't think the founders simply forgot to leave out clarifications on whether it was acceptable to allow for an Islamic takeover of a town in Michigan. It was obviously taken for granted that when countrymen was listed, it implied an ethnically and culturally unified community member, not some random Congolese man who can't speak English and whose driver's license says no name given. Distinguishing why someone of a similar ethnic or cultural makeup follows from our natural humanity. There's a reason we say blood is thicker than water. It's self-evident that the genetics we share with family becomes one of the most intrinsically powerful bonds imaginable. It's a result of our human condition and can't be wiped away by a mandate from social constructivists. To say that you should care more for your brother than a stranger seems as self-evident as anything could be, but not to liberals, who will intentionally attack this relationship. The grounds for the assault stems from the left's claim that we are all blank slates. This proposes that we are basically interchangeable and indistinguishable as people at the time of our birth. The theory refuses to recognize that there are any inherent traits and behaviors specific to classified groups that could perhaps exist independently of any environmental or external factors. It views us as all beginning with equal potential. Under this doctrine, racial differences are viewed strictly as cosmetic and arbitrary, or as a result of the environment. And they're often said to be functionally inconsequential, like eye and hair color. They look at it like this. You and your family members are made up of water, carbon, and hydrogen, as is everybody else. So what's the difference? It's a purely mechanical analysis. But if this logic is extrapolated further, Building upon the basis that there are no inherent differences between us, then the relationships we have don't carry any unique weight either, since we all ourselves are nearly synonymous to each other. And so the distinction between family and stranger begins to disintegrate. DNA means nothing to the left, both definitionally and theoretically. They see these familial relationships as arbitrary, and so this allows for them to insist that you can effortlessly insert a needy stranger into the same hierarchical position as your own brother, because to them you are both just people, and nothing fundamentally distinguishes your brother from that random person besides circumstance. And since the stranger is in greater need, it's now your duty to care for him in the same manner as you would your kin. When this proposal is obviously rejected, they'll then tell you that to treat a stranger differently than your family is actually contradictory to your own beliefs, and the very idea that all humans have the same inherent worth. And they'll always reference some nonsense strawman about what Jesus said, and then tell you that if you don't automatically and immediately cater to the most disadvantaged person available, you're rejecting the humanity of them.
Like J.D. Vance, the thing about Ordo Amoris, did you follow that? The
Yeah, I saw
the
that.
and I did two shows on this
Hierarchy.
question because it's the
Yeah.
main question. If you're a
Yes.
Christian, I read it as you're obligated to believe all people are your brothers and sisters and they're all God's children and you have equal duty and obligations to them as you do to people who live in your town. I'm not a Christian. That's why I'm not a Christian, because it's inherently imperialist to me. But if you claim to be a good Christian, you can't be America first.
But how you distribute your time and affection in no way negates the universality of all humans having this value. And there is absolutely no basis for this proposition. Preferences don't automatically ascribe hostility to non-preferences. And since heritage bonds are often non-consensual, they rip at the very nature of liberalism's moral framework of consent. These familial bonds are non-consensual, yet obligatory, which is why the left pushes for ideological bonds between us instead, because ideology can be actively consented to. But we most certainly did not consent to our relationship with our parents, siblings, cousins, or any family member. Yet we have a duty and obligation to them as they do to us. Just as we should care for our family before a neighbor, we should then value those of a similar ethnic and cultural makeup, formerly known colloquially as countrymen, over random foreigners with no ethnic or cultural cohesion with us. And so if we do consider those of a same or approximate race and culture as being closer in the order of love, that again does not automatically bestow hatred upon those excluded from higher positions on the ladder. It's important to note that this exclusion and any other form of exclusion is of course never inherently wrong anyway. If you're a liberal, I know you're going to have a tough time with this, but it's axiomatic. Choosing to go to the bathroom right when you wake up is technically exclusionary to eating breakfast. But the exclusion is merely a reorientation within a hierarchy. It doesn't necessarily define the excluded as a bad thing. By this same logic, the preference for a specific race to desire the company of those who share its same bonds of heritage does not relegate people of differing ethnic origin as being unworthy of human dignity. To enjoy one type of food over another doesn't label the other as an illegitimate source of energy. But what is also often left unsaid is that every society must have a definable, limiting principle for inclusion. And ideological bonds cannot act as a viable sorting mechanism here. Firstly, they can never actually be proven, and they also can't be vetted very well either. A quiz being given to prospective citizens simply isn't enough, sorry. To define is to exclude, and to avoid degeneration, a society, like any organization, must establish itself as something explicit and then maintain adherence to that core identity. And this is done through the exclusion of anything that doesn't align with itself and the promotion of everything that does. Ideology is not an effective delineator at scale. Since every society always runs the risk of destruction, it must be alert to all internally and externally compromising forces. And so if your political ideology isn't able to identify a breakdown in your societal order while there is an ongoing invasion of third world brown people, which would otherwise be obvious if race was recognized, it's going to be far too late to resolve the problem once everyone realizes what's happened. Gradually, then suddenly. And that's to say nothing of the inability for these propositional bonds to actually constrain a society against externally dividing forces on their own. Something I noticed in high school really helped me understand why a unifying idea isn't enough to foster a sense of community and obligation to those working with you. Comparing my high school sports team environment to the summer travel league team I played on really showed me that a group of longtime friends with a shared daily life and history, common values and families, bred a bond indescribably stronger than just a collection of talented players across the state who all wanted to get college scholarships. During those summer games, I'll never forget just how fast any obligation to your team vanished as soon as you'd get the ball. The jersey ultimately meant nothing. The friendships that had only been around for a few weeks did not translate into a feeling of community at all. There was no focus on winning as a collective, only on personal excellence. The team could have been losing by 10 points, which would otherwise have been insanely demoralizing, but in this case it didn't matter. The desire to take glory into your own hands ended up consuming you and frankly everybody else. The players that had good games would be elated, no matter what happened on the scoreboard. Those that didn't take advantage of the spotlight were absolutely devastated. But when I finished my high school games, got on the bus with my friends, talked and laughed, then went over to one of their houses with a few of them, drank beer and talked shit, then went to school together the next day. Well, the jersey was cool, but those weren't just my teammates. We may have also believed similar things, but it went far deeper than that. I'll still, of course, admit that ideological bonds are important. They're the operating system of a society, but they are not a primary unifier. And to assume a proposition can stand as an independent bulwark against chaos is inexcusably naive. And the founders understood this too. George Washington noted in his farewell address that we are one united people, descended from the same ancestors. Ideology is the shoelace, but it's not the shoe. Our heritage is the shoe. The founders realized specifically that we, as Americans, are not interchangeable units. You can't just import a random Indian who agrees with the Constitution and expect a bond to form which is just and deep as powerful as the one you have with your cousin. We are united firstly because we are descended from the same origin. But frankly, I don't even need the founders' justification for this, because it's actually aligned with the natural order that those of us on the based side of the right wing want our society to be made up of those who share a heritage with us. And those who don't have that common ancestry simply have no place in joining this country now. It's our nation here to serve us just as we are here to serve it. But that exclusion in no way implies a secret desire for the eradication of those without consanguinity, nor does it even suggest that we wish ill upon them. And this needs to be far better understood on a societal level. Those without a law degree would take absolutely no personal offense at their friend's law firm not being interested in hiring them as a litigator. Would anyone find it rude to explain to your good friend that unfortunately your family reunion is reserved for family only? But to analogize this further, what maniac would counter that refusal by promising to do all the dishes after your family dinner ends, if only you let him come? Because at the moment, everyone seems to take real offense at the idea of Americans not wanting these random, incongruous third worlders lumped into our society. And the rebuttal to this exclusion is an assurance that they'll work really hard. We don't care about that. We want our country connected through bonds of heritage. The GDP means nothing to us anymore. But even more absurd is the fact that we had the wealthiest, most powerful, dominant country in the world before all this began. To say the poison which led us to this will actually be our cure, if only accentuated, is as dishonest a statement as can be possibly made. But despite this hostility to integration, do not confuse it for an underlying hatred. Just as you can think of your friend as a great person and hope the best for him, yet still not feel that he fits what you need at your company, you can feel the same way about the exclusion of foreigners from your nation. There is nothing personal about this rejection. It is a categorical definition which slots them outside of our defined community. And because it is categorical, it actually precludes personal discrimination. And so the desire for a productive and successful state of those with your same heritage does not mean that you don't want the best for others and their own countries. The collective success of humanity would be a wonderful thing, but the collective success of humanity will always lie beneath the success of our own kind and culture on our Ordo Amoris, just as every other ethnicity should and does feel about their own kind as well. And on another note, we also don't give a shit what you call us at this point anyway.